Paul Mensa's Wall of Power TV is brought to you in part by Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation, Two Gingers Irish Whiskey, Grey Wolf Lodge, your home away from home in the North Woods, and the Solar Arts Building in Northeast Minneapolis. This program was produced and originally broadcast in 2017.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wall of Power. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. Rob Chapman has written a great book called The New Barbarians, Outlaws, Gunslingers, and Guitars. It's about a supergroup that included Ron Wood, fellow Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, jazz bassist Stanley Clarke, former Faces keyboardist Ian McLagan, saxman Bobby Keys, and drummer Joseph Zigaboo Modaliste from the legendary New Orleans group The Meters. The book chronicles gigs the band did between 1979 and 1980 and features some incredible photos as well as a companion CD. When was the actual genesis, you go, New Barbarians? There's a book here. You know, what did that happen, or who had that idea? Was it you?
I mean, it's, you know, there's diehard Stones fans that are on the sites that love the New Barbarians. You know, they just love them. And I was one of those guys that would buy Cream magazine, Circus magazine,
right.
And you see these great spread, you know, because the Stones had Some Girls in '78, toured for it. They should have done a European tour in '79, but there were so many things going on. Their band was, you know, messed up. In a good way, but in a, you know, disorganized way. So I always thought the Barbarians became, you know, this, I just loved them. So I'm sitting here not too far away from them, listening to bootlegs, which you can get at a lot of places.
Right.
Not so quality, not so good. You know, reading about them in different, you know, books. Me and McLagan, we got a book right here. It's got a whole chapter on him. Bobby Keys, we did a big chapter on him. And you know, this whole thing about meeting the Stones, I was emailing Ronnie Wood one night, and he's in London, so 6 hours ahead of me, and I'm listening to a boot from Cincinnati, and it's just like, I'm just sitting here just thinking, you know, he's asking me, how does it sound? And I go, it's good. You know, you could punch up the guitars and things
right.
could be worked on. And I said, it just came out, like, why hasn't anybody documented this in a grand scale? Like,
right.
I'm thinking coffee table book, pictures. You know, it would be so cool, and Stones fans would eat it up. And he goes, why don't you do it, or something like
right.
that. And I went, you know, in my head, I'm like, because I'm not an author.
Right.
And then I thought, you know, why not me?
Yeah, right.
And then I think what he was pushing me towards is, we had built a friendship up at that point, is that he probably felt, you can do it.
Right.
You can do it the right way, and he knows that I know people.
Right.
So I'm going to
And you've got a respect for it.
Yeah, and I think that he was thinking, and it was a very big moment for me as not only a Stones fan, but as my character, was that he was telling me that, you'll make it good.
Right.
And that was enough.
Right.
And I said, I got an email from his manager, Sherry, and Sherry was like, you know, I hear you have some ideas for the Barbarians. He goes, you know, send them to me and Ronnie. And I basically put a marketing plan together with a friend of mine who was working at Caroline Records, because I wanted to do, if I was going to do it, I wanted the music to be a companion. You know, read the
right.
book, hear the music, whole thing. And put together a marketing plan. The fact that I knew these guys was a big plus, I'm sure, for them. And we sell to the music community as well as the book community. And the fact that the Stones were still active
right.
Was obviously a big thing. And it was just, if I would have been working for 3M, it wouldn't have happened.
Well, what's interesting, too, tell us a little bit about the backstory, because Keith Richards went through a serious bust in Toronto around that time, and the Stones weren't playing, but tell us, Rob, how that all kind of came into play with the band, and how you were telling me before we started talking on air tonight, how Keith said that this band, the New Barbarians, really saved his life.
Yeah. I mean, the Barbarians, and I'm not the one that came up with this concept, it's, well, people buy into this whole thing. The Barbarians are two-pronged. You've got Keith's world and Ronnie's world. I mean, they're still in the same band, but coming
right.
together to make the New Barbarians. Keith, the Stones are going to want to finish Love You Live, which was a live record that came out in '77. They needed a fourth side. All the other sides are live tracks from the '75, '76 tour. They want to go back and get a live bluesy cover side from a club. They know they can't pull that off in New York or LA, so they need to go somewhere big, but somewhere off the beaten path. They pick Toronto. They pick a club called the Elmo Combo Club. So they're all going to meet there, play a live gig, secret live gig, try to pull that off when the Stones are huge at that point, and then record it, and then that'll be side 4 of Love You Live. So they all get there, and Keith is at that point, you know, hopelessly addicted to junk.
Right.
He's traveling with his longtime girl, Anita. And everybody, back then it was, let's meet October 1st to finish the blah, blah, blah. Keith would always be at least a week late.
Right.
So they're waiting for Keith as usual. He comes in, Anita and Keith coming into Canada at the airport. Anita gets busted. Right. You know, variations of the story, a dirty spoon, there's a little coke, all this, but they detain her.
Right.
Keith slides around, you know, she gets taken with the 28 pieces of luggage that they have for traveling. He checks into a hotel, the Harbor Castle Hotel in Toronto, under the name, you know, K. Redlings. And back then they had what are called floaters. Floaters are 5, 6 rooms where they're all registered. Famous people did it back then, supposedly, where you didn't know where they were staying. So Keith had 5 rooms called floaters under K. Redlings. And it took the authorities a long time, like a day later, to find out where he was. They paid off a chambermaid, whatever they call him, and they found him and went in, and he had over an ounce of heroin, whatever, cocaine, and which was enough for trafficking purposes. And at that time, you know, they were just out to get, you know, it was the goody-goody guys going after these rich rock stars. Right. And so Keith got arrested with that's 77, obviously, a ton of drugs. Right. So he has to stay in Canada a while. They end up doing the show at the Elmo Combo, and it's documented in the book. I mean, they go there. What's really funny about the show is that they're billed as the Cockroaches, and they're going to play with the band April Wine, who was huge at the time in Canada. Right. So the winners for a local radio station were given they won a contest, why you like the Rolling Stones, or I forget what they had to write in. So they had, I think it was 150 winners. You have to go on a bus, they darken the bus, they take them to this club to see the Cockroaches.
And what is it, what, 200-seater, or what, how big is the club?
Yeah, I think it's 300 maybe. Yeah, okay. Yeah, a little club. Yeah. And so they're going to go see April Wine and a band called the Cockroaches. So April Wine does a set beautifully, and they ended up putting out a live record themselves from the night. So these people are sitting there in the dark. The Stones, with Billy Preston, Ollie Brown on percussion, are getting led through the kitchen, holding hands. The only lights they could see were the amps and the cigarettes. Wow. And all of a sudden the lights come on and the people are like, you know, I wasn't there, but the jaws drop. It's the Stones. Wow. And they do.
How cool is that?
I mean,
how cool is that?
And Chet Flippo, who was writing for Rolling Stone at the time, said they did 2 nights, and he said the second night, he said, you know, keep it short, he said they were on fire. Yeah. He goes, Jagger was just out of control, good. Keith and Ronnie were locked in. He goes, that's when you go, because they're in a bar, you go, yeah, they are the greatest rock and roll band. Right. Right there you saw it. Right. So that was, you know, that was part 1 of the Barbarians, was that Keith getting arrested. They do the show, they get out of Canada. Keith, because the Stones had, you know, high-powered lawyers, he doesn't have to stand trial for 20 more months, so fall of 78.
This is great stuff, Rob. I'm really enjoying it.
It's fun.
Little music, and be back with the Wall of Power in just a bit. We've been talking with Rob Chapman. He's got a great book about the band, the New Barbarians, Ronnie Wood's band with Keith Richards, on the Wall of Power. We ended up, the last set you were telling us, the Stones had gone on stage and just rocked the Alma Combo. So now tell us, so Keith's in trouble with his bust.
Yep.
Stones aren't playing. So then how do the New Barbarians actually get started?
So they have to wait for Keith's trial. So while all this is going on, the Stones do Some Girls, they're on top of the world, 6 million copies, Beast of Burden, Miss You, big tour. That was on the surface. Under the scenes there was talk that the Stones are done. He's going to go away.
And weren't those some of the first videos too? I mean, that was
when they first started shooting videos.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that was
promotional videos were just getting going.
Yeah.
Like "Miss You" they did, and "Beast of Burden" they did a great one for "Far Away Eyes,"
right.
the country kind of
Waiting
song.
on a Friend.
Yep, that was off Tattoo You, but it was early, one of the leftovers from that session.
Yeah.
So so this all goes on, and they have to wait to see if they're kind of mad. I mean, they're being the Stones, but. So the Some Girls tour ends. Are we ever going to play with Keith again? They don't know.
Right.
So the fall comes and goes.
Yeah, he could. I mean, he was looking at
7 to Life.
Yeah, 7 to Life.
Fast forward, fall of '78, the Stones do something unprecedented in October of that year. Saturday Night Live, 3 songs, no commercials. They just went boom, boom, boom. Back then it was song, commercial, come back, song, 3 in a row. So they're on top of the world, trials in 2 weeks. Keith goes to trial. The whole defense was, Mr. Richards is a CEO of a very large company. He has a
true.
It was true. He has a $300,000 a year drug habit,
Right.
but he doesn't need the deal to pay for that. He needs help,
Right.
which I thought our country was for helping them,
Right.
but he's not selling drugs.
Right.
Keith gets off. His sentence is 2 shows as the Stones in the next calendar year for free.
Wow.
And he has to do them in Toronto.
Right.
So while all this is going on, Ronnie's got a chance to go out and do something on his own. So he ends up recording an album called Gimme Some Neck. And he's got a short window where he's like any other band, as you know, you're going to go promote your record.
Right.
So he puts together a band. So he puts together the ones we talked about. Who's he going to get on guitar? He's going to get Keith. He gets, Stanley Clarke was a weird choice because he just loved Stanley, and Stanley was hot at the time, is becoming a great jazz bassist.
And playing with Return to Forever, I believe, right?
Yep, correct. He'd already done School Days.
Yeah.
And the story's funny. He calls up, back then there was no texting, there was no voicemail. There was just, you left a message at the front desk. Stanley's in Miami on vacation. He finds him. Stanley returns his call, and he says, I'm going to form a band and tour behind my record. He goes, you know any Chuck Berry? And Stanley's like, yeah, I know Chuck Berry.
Right.
So you're hired. But what's weird about that is getting Stanley Clarke was really influenced by Ronnie's bass playing on the Jeff Beck records. So it was weird, yeah. And he was like, this is great. He goes, I always thought Ronnie's bass playing was innovative. So he gets Stanley.
That's a great record.
Yeah. And but it's just kind of odd that Ronnie just picked Stanley because he thought it'd be a fun pairing. Stanley was like, does he know that I really like his bass playing?
Right.
So they
rock and roll.
and it all worked. He gets Zigaboo, he gets Bobby Keys, he gets Ian McClagan. All these guys know each other. So Ronnie goes out and says, I'm going to put together 2 or 3. He's got a deal with Columbia, and they're going to go out in the fall or the spring of '79. So where they come together is, so Keith's got to do 2 shows as the Stones to pay back his, penance, his jail sentence. April 22nd, 1979. They do, it's called a small town outside Toronto called Oshawa. So think about this. So the Barbarians do the first show at 4 o'clock. Next show, they open up for the Stones, who do a show at 6 o'clock. Barbarians come back out at 7:30, and the Stones close the night at 9 or whatever. So that's the last time the Stones have done 2 shows in one day.
Right.
And Keith and Ronnie had to do 4 shows in a row, which, at the time they're like, oh, they're old. They were 35.
Right.
So they obviously had energy, we know now.
Yeah.
But Keith does does what he's supposed to do, is like Mick said, if they just wanted us to, if they just wanted money, I just would have wrote a check.
Right.
So we played 2 shows. Barbarians do their 2 shows. Charlie and everybody goes back. Ronnie's tour for the Barbarians to promote Gimme Some Neck started that night, and they did 16 more dates in the summer of '79. So there's this air of, whew, I didn't go
Right.
to prison.
Right.
But everybody else said there was some of that, but there was also, Keith was kind of terrified a little bit because he had never been away from the Stones.
Right.
He did not want to fall on his face.
Right.
So they called him the old man on that tour because he was always cracking the whip like, Mac, Ronnie, we're all having fun here.
Right.
Belushi was around, but they needed to crack the whip because he did not want to be embarrassed.
Right.
So the New Barbarians were formed.
Let's talk a little bit about the tour. There was some crazy stuff. There was a riot or two, wasn't there?
Yeah, so the tour goes on. We were just talking about this before we came on. Is that Neil Young was originally going to possibly go out with them, and he got tired of waiting around and basically one night just flippantly said, "Yeah, you guys are nothing but a bunch of barbarians." So they were, "Oh, I like that." And then there was a garage band. I guess it was already called the Barbarians, so they switched it to New Barbarians. So that's where the name came from. So they go out. And they weren't billed as Ronnie Wood. They were billed who did have a big name.
Right.
They were billed as the New Barbarians.
Right.
So they were fearful, the promoters and management, of are they going to be able to sell out? Because they were booking Target Center type places.
Sure.
Are they going to be able to? I mean, you had pretty big names, but they're still a little leery. So
Right.
what they started doing on the posters, and unbeknownst to Ronnie and Keith, New Barbarians and Friends. And some of the rumors got so heavy that it was
Wink,
like,
wink, hint,
yeah,
hint.
Mick's got to show up at
Sure.
one of them. How about Rod Stewart?
Yeah, right.
Van Morrison, Jimmy Page.
Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan. It went on, and it got so bad that, I mean, there were times, and you can even hear in some of the bootlegs, is that, you would hear people go, "Where's Mick? Where's
Right.
Van?" And Ronnie and Keith have this look like, what are they talking about?
Right,
Because
right.
they didn't know.
Right.
And they're like, so Ronnie's even said in some of the, like, introducing the band, like, these are the New Barbarians, and if these boys ain't special enough,
Right.
this isn't my band.
Sure.
So it got so heated in Milwaukee that when nobody showed up, there obviously was a lot of alcohol with the fans.
Well, it was Milwaukee.
It was Milwaukee, and it was predominantly a male crowd.
Right.
They got they trashed the place. The best way to describe it is the villagers in a Frankenstein movie.
Wow.
Where's the monster?
Right.
And it got so bad that Ronnie's manager at the time, Jason Cooper, who was a footballer, who was a soccer kind of, so his whole thing was make it a spectacle. Wasn't a music guy. The stories differ. Keith chased him off the tour with either a gun or a knife and said, "Don't ever show your face around
Right.
here again." It's like we don't believe in deception. We can stand
Right.
on our own laurels. And so he got fired because of all the hype that was going on behind the scenes. So the tour was marred with a lot of stuff that was a little hair raising for the guys.
There was a big show at Nebworth that was actually, because we were talking when we were setting up this interview, if there was any video to be had. And so tell us about that show. That was Led Zeppelin headlined, right?
Yeah, Led Zeppelin was the headliner, and they opened up they were the last. There was Todd Rundgren was there, Marshall Tucker. Barbarians went on right before Zeppelin, and significance because it was John Bonham's last gig with Zeppelin in the
Really?
UK. Yeah, because then he died in '80, so he was the last time he played with Zeppelin in the UK. So significance there, but Nebworth was. It was a huge deal, and
Kind of like what Glastonbury is now?
yeah.
Okay.
And it was two different dates, and the Barbarians tour ended in June, so there was a couple months off where they weren't doing anything, and they were asked to come do Nebworth. And there's a chapter of it in the book about getting paid. It's a great story. But the only guy that couldn't make it was Stanley, and I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, I would have done it in a second. I just had other commitments." And he
Right.
goes through everybody. So they got Phil Chen, who ended up playing with the Faces at the end before they broke up. So he had a crash course learning all those songs. So yeah, the Barbarians did Nebworth, and that was the last gig that they did as that unit of the Barbarians. The end of '79.
Now, Ronnie Wood, he funded a lot of this. A lot of this was out of his own pocket. I'm sure the band got paid. Do you have any idea how Ronnie ended up financially after this whole
Took
thing?
a big bath, and he admits it. He lost a lot of money, and he said that he wanted to, everybody they rode in limos, they took private
Right.
planes, they ate good food, had a lot of fun, and he said, "I wouldn't have done it any other way."
Right.
And he said, looking back, he goes, "I'd do it all over again."
Right.
But he totally lost money on it.
Right.
And, but that's, that's the way he wanted to do it, and he did it that way. And all those guys, got paid handsomely to do those gigs.
Right. Well, I can't imagine those five at that level of their career, stage of their career, getting in a van.
No, no.
Welcome back to the last set of The Wall of Power. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. My guest for the whole show tonight with some fantastic stories is Rob Chapman. None of the other Stones showed up at any of these
Not
gigs.
one gig, and these are all the kind of things that I researched and asked, and they said, it was funny because Stanley we were talking about this, I said, nobody else showed up, Charlie or no Mick? And he goes, no. He goes, well, Mick showed up at Madison Square Garden, and I go, I'm thinking, I'm talking to him on the phone at this point, and I said, you sure? I said, I don't think so.
Right.
I'm arguing with Stanley Clark.
Right.
And he goes, no, he was there. And I go, I don't think so. I go, I've never heard that. I go, really? And so we went back and forth. He goes, maybe it's me. He goes, but let me think about that. So we hung up. So I emailed Ronnie, and I said, Stanley's saying that Mick was at the Madison Square Garden show. I've never seen that. And he goes, it was like a quick response. He goes, what was Stanley on that night? So he goes, no way. Ronnie's like, no way, never happened. And then laugh, he's got Ronnie's big on emojis now. That he's got
funny.
some of the muscle things, and he's like, Stanley. And it's like, I told Stanley, and he laughed. He goes, I don't know. I just thought, why did I think Mick was there? So this went on for like 15 minutes. So no Stones showed up at any of the gigs.
Well, and the interesting thing about the band, Stanley Clark, I thought was an inspired choice, but Ziggy Modelliste, one of the greatest drummers ever from New Orleans, and played with the Meters.
The reason he got the gig is that Charlie Watts almost went out. He was on Ronnie's solo album, had nothing to do again because the Stones weren't on the road. He almost went out, but he ended up putting a band, Rocket 88, together, which was his big band kind of jazz thing.
Right.
Charlie said, Ronnie said, who would you get? And he goes, I'd get Ziggy.
Wow.
So Charlie recommended Ziggy, and Ziggy was the only guy, not on the inside circles. Everybody knew how great he was.
Yeah.
But he was the only guy that wasn't famous.
Yeah.
Right. Bobby Keys was top of his game, Stanley, Ronnie, and Keith. So Ziggy was the guy that wasn't coming there with, a big, I just got off a big tour. He was trying to find gigs here and there.
Yeah.
Meters were a few years before. So, but yeah, he fit in perfectly. And, everybody said, boy, when Zig and Stanley would lock in, man.
Oh, I bet.
That's a rhythm section.
Yeah, that's a powerful train.
Yeah.
Uncle buried alive, give me some Nick money,
Tell us a little bit about, I know you've got to run. I really appreciate your time, Rob
I love
Chapman.
doing this.
No, you're doing I'm really enjoying it. I mean,
We're in your living room, aren't we?
yeah, pretty much, and my wheelhouse.
Yes.
The book came out when, and it was right after both McClagan and Bobby Keys passed away.
The book came out in January of this year, 2017, but it took me 2 years to do it. The week that I was to have the meeting and the book was going to be up for review was December 4th. 2 days before that, actually let's go back, 5 days before that, Bobby Keys passes. He was sick. It wasn't a shock to everybody, but still sad. Bobby passes. I was actually sitting at my desk 2 days after Bobby, and I got an email from Ronnie. I went to lunch, and it said, we lost another Barbarian. And I looked at the email before I opened it, and I'm like, what's he talking about? Because Bobby Keys had already been talked about, and I'm like, he's just still talking about Bobby.
Right.
And I opened it up, and he goes, Mac just slipped and is in a coma.
Wow.
So Ian McClagan 2 days later dies, and the really bizarre thing about that is he was going to go get in his town car, his car service from Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
Come here. He was going to do his first show with Nick Lowe in Minneapolis.
Oh,
so it's
man.
like the whole thing was swirling around me. I'm like, do I do this book still? It's too weird. And Ronnie's actually said to me on an email, he goes, no, you got to. He goes, and I dedicated the music and everything to Mac and Bobby.
Nice.
So everybody said, no, you got to. And that's why I called the album, the vinyl that I put out, Wanted Dead or Alive. Because they would have said, oh, they'll love that. You
Yeah,
know?
right.
A couple of them aren't here, but they're still wanted.
That barbarian pirate humor.
Exactly.
How many songs are on the CD?
10.
10. And how did you figure out which tunes you wanted to use?
Well, there was, on any given night, they did about 16, 17 songs. And they did 3 Stone songs on any given night, Jumpin' Jack Flash, Honky Tonk Woman, and Before They Make Me Run. I did not want to go down the road of doing Jagger Richards songs.
Right.
It's just a whole other quagmire.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't have been okayed.
Tell us how you got all these great photos.
There was 4 photographers that I was able to get a hold of pretty easily. The one that was the famous one is Henry Diltz. Henry was contracted by the record label to shoot numerous Barbarian shows. And then there were 3 other ones that dropped in and out at the tour. They own the rights to photography, but they were more than happy to let these photos see the light of day.
Is there a website where people can track this
I
down?
don't have a website now.
All right, but Barnes & Noble and...
Barnes & Noble's carrying the book, Amazon's carrying the book. You know, everybody just put in New Barbarians and it'll come up.
Rob Chapman, it's only rock and roll, brother.
But we like it.
But we like it.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.